What's going on, guys? This is Brigade898 coming to you once again with another session of Dark Souls PvP. Alright guys, we're back at it once again for yet another installment of the Battle of the... Actually, I don't think we're going to do a Battle of the Uploaders. As a matter of fact, I think it would be more appropriate to do a Rumble in the Jungle. Now, before I get started, I'd like to offer my thanks and show of appreciation to good old Eric Arianto. Not only Eric Arianto, but also BlueBeee898. Now, Eric Arianto is actually a YouTube uploader. And as a matter of fact, I think he makes some really good and inspirational videos, especially for people who are brand new to PvP. Right? And some of those videos, as a matter of fact, a couple in particular, he has one that's called Your Winds Will Eventually Come. I think that's very inspirational, especially for new players. And he has another one titled Learn, Adapt, and Change. Right, which basically in a lot of his videos, he's been kind of basically just showcasing, how he started and some of the things you go through, being brand new to PvP, specifically with the ones with the video titled Your Winds Will Eventually Come. And then he kind of talks about in the Learn, Adapt, and Change video, basically the process after you learn, kind of like the very basics when it comes to Dark Souls PvP. So I think those two videos are very inspiring, especially if you're a new person. As a matter of fact, I know I've talked about those videos at times in the past. Right, and in addition to those, as a matter of fact, good old Eric Arianto has been doing uploads for about a year. Right, I think he has over 60 videos up to this point, and he has a good number of subscribers. So if you guys want to check out some good videos, please go ahead and check out his channel. Now, two videos in particular that I think are really funny is 9 Ways to Die and Dark Souls. Right, that's pretty funny. And he has another one titled Comedians of Lordran. So if you guys want to get a good laugh, like I said before, go ahead, check out and support his channel. I'll ensure to put a link to his channel in the description box. Now, in addition to good old Eric Arianto, he has a PvP buddy for the most part, whose name is BlueBeee898. And one thing about those two, they both live in total opposite time zones than the one that I live in. As a matter of fact, I think these matches took place at around, I think it was like 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And, even though it was 11 a.m. where I was, it was like near midnight where they were. Alright, so when I say opposite time zones, I literally meant opposite time zone. So, I know Eric and BlueBee both said, let's have some matches in the past, but because of the opposite time zones, it was very difficult. Right, so we basically exchanged correspondence, and they're like, hey dude, let's just go ahead and dedicate, let's just go ahead and schedule a time where all three of us can get some matches in, since it would be more difficult any other time due to the differences in time zone. So I said, okay, sure. So we went on ahead, scheduled, and here are the series of matches that we fought. Now, another thing to keep in mind, we actually fought here for, I'll say, close to 3 hours. As a matter of fact, I have near 3 hours of footage, and it wasn't exclusively myself, BlueBee, or Eric. Right, later on, later on in the recording, more people started to come here in the Moonlight Butterfly Forest, but early on, it was pretty much the three of us. Right, for I'll say a good 2 hours. So what I did was, since it was so much footage, I just went on ahead and uploaded the first, 25 minutes. So to the extent that good old Eric Arianto may choose to upload, some of the videos to showcase, he may do some of the same ones that I'm showcasing, or he may do some of the latter part of the series that we had. Right, but either way it go, it was a good series of matches between myself and the both of them. right? Now, one thing about the builds, good old Eric Arianto, one thing about him that I like especially is that his claim to fame is pretty much dealing with strength weapons. Right, for the most part, as long as I've been watching his channel, he's kind of been into this thing about, you know what, I'm just going to use strength weapons. And I think that's a good thing, because you definitely need a lot of patience. As a matter of fact, I even think that good old Eric has a video that kind of talks about you know, the difference between using strength weapons and some of the faster dexterity weapons, wherein he just basically says that you need to have more patience, you need to time your attacks, and some of the other things that you need to consider when selecting these type of weapons. Alright, so that's another good thing about his channel. He's definitely one to use the strength weapons. Now, with regard to builds, Eric, for the most part, started off using strength weapons. And I'm pretty sure you guys can tell, at least throughout the first half of this particular video, he used a lot of strength weapons, right? Club, Black Knight Halberd, you know, Black Knight Great Axe, Man Serpent Great Sword, you know, all of the standard strength weapons. Now, let's kind of talk about the strengths and weaknesses of a strength build. Now, for the most part, you know, you can't really go wrong with a strength build. A lot of them will stagger you very easily. As a matter of fact, if you two-hand a mace, you can easily stagger anyone who has less than 53 poise. The same can be said with most other weapons, right? But personally, where I think the developers went wrong with regard to strength weapons is, in my personal opinion, the heavier the weapon is, the more damage it should inflict. Flat out. In other words, a Black Knight Great Axe, which weighs 16 units, should inflict a lot more damage than, let's just say, a large club. So in other words, let's just say I two-hand a large club. It should be, and actually the way I look at it, it should be a lot less damage than a two-handed Black Knight Great Axe, because think about it. That's, what is that, 5 more units or 6 more units? So if it weighs more, it should inflict more damage. The same could be said with, let's just say, the you know, some of the dragon weapons. You know, a lot of them don't have any scaling, but they weigh 24 units. So in other words, if a weapon weighs 24 units, it should inflict more damage than, let's just say, a weapon that that requires 16 units, and significantly more damage than a weapon that only weighs 6 units. And I think that's one of the areas where the developers went wrong with regard to strength weapons. Right? Because if I need to make a sacrifice to be able to wield them, they shouldn't inflict the same amount of damage as, let's just say, a claymore at 2840. Or let's just say a chaos blade with 10 humanity. That's absolutely ridiculous. So I really hope in Dark Souls 2 they kind of changed it up with regard to the strength weapons. And, you know, one thing that I especially like with regard to strength weapons, at least in Demon Souls, is the fact that they could knock you down. Right, that was one thing I really liked in Demon Souls, that knockdown animation. I think it was kind of cool to go along with the strength theme, right? Because in other words, if you have all this strength and you're so strong, I mean, they should be able to knock you down. And if not all the times, at least at some times. So, I mean, you know, that's just my own personal take. And another thing that I really think kind of sucks with regard to strength weapons, you guys will notice with some strength weapons, a one-handed will only hit for, let's just say, 300 or I would say in the 300s. That's still BS to me, because keeping consistent with my previous observation, if it's heavy and it requires more strength for you to use it one-handed, you should be able to inflict more damage one-handed. Case in point, let's just go back to my previous example. Let's just say you have a large club, which I believe weighs, I think, 11 units. One-handed at 40 strength, you should hit a lot. Well, actually, you should be able to inflict more damage than a one-handed claymore. And in some cases, that is not the case. So I really hope that they make some improvements with regards to strength weapons in the next game. I hope that they, I don't know. I mean, hopefully they'll bring back some of that invincibility that you would get when you use those R2s, right? Because, you know, they did have that benefit as well in Demon Souls. So I just hope they bring back some of those properties with regard to strength weapons in the next Souls game. Okay, but enough about my own observations about strength weapons. He's using a lot of these strength weapons and he's being really effective with them. Outside of that, I mean, there's really no strengths or weaknesses. Well, actually, outside of, you know, having a higher AR, there's not really that many benefits, right? I mean, the backstabs will definitely inflict more damage, and they have a higher AR on average. The downside to using strength weapons is that they require a lot more patience. Since a lot of those weapons, the swinging animation is a lot slower than a lot of these dex weapons. I mean, there's a lot of room for punishment. Right, even on my own strength build, I really have to sit here, take more time, and plan out when I'm going to attack. I can't just go at a, you know, kind of like on a full-out assault the same way that I could with, let's just say, a claymore or with a katana, because that room for punishment is definitely there. A miss swing, you could get roll BS, especially for those people who, I mean, that's pretty much all they do is roll BS. Which, I mean, you know, that's just the type of players you have to deal with in some occasions. But, you know, a good thing is that they stagger, depending upon how much poise you have. But, I mean, then again, if you're kind of good at toggling, you can't depend on staggering. Case in point, and as a matter of fact, speaking of all this stuff that I'm talking about, because, you know, one thing about me in particular, I try not to talk unless I can back up what I'm saying. In other words, you know, I'll sit here and say, which I do believe, that even if you're using strength weapons, you shouldn't depend on staggering. You shouldn't depend, in other words, your gameplay with regard to strength weapons should not be based upon, well, I'll just stun lock the crap out of them. Because guess what? If you're not able to stun lock the crap out of your opponent, then, I mean, what do? Can't really do anything if that's what your gameplay depends on. So just like when you use any other type of weapons, if you decide to use a strength build, your focus should be trying to outmaneuver your opponent and not necessarily stun lock them to death. Because think about it, either you will be faced against a Darkwood Grain Ring that'll pretty much flip through all of your attacks, or a low poise fast roller who could probably toggle through a lot of your attacks, or a medium or fat boy rolling build with a lot of poise that could just poise through your attacks. So given all these three scenarios, if you guys plan to use a strength build, please, just a little personal advice. I mean, you guys can do what you want. But my own personal advice is for you guys' gameplay to not depend on stun locking your opponent to death. Because in other words, if that's what your gameplay is based on, when you can't do it, more than likely you'll get frustrated and you'll just basically give up strength weapons. So you really have to be a little more patient, and you have to try to outplay your opponent and not base your gameplay on stun locking. Okay, so enough about that rant. Like I said before, I'm going to go ahead and use my strength build for, I don't know, probably about 2 or 3 videos. I mean, I think the last time I dedicated videos to strength builds was, I think, last year, somewhere around when the PC version was released, and that's when I did the, you know, why would you need dexterity when you have strength series. So I think it's about time for me to go ahead and resurrect my strength build. So enough about that. So I'll just go ahead and review that once again. Positives, you can stagger a lot of people with strength weapons. The potential is definitely there. And number two, although they do inflict more damage, I mean, the damage is not really that significant for some people to make the sacrifices that you would need to use some of the strength weapons. Case in point, that demon, I think Great Hammer or Great Axe or something like that. I think you need like 46 strength minimum to be able to use it, which is a huge sacrifice. Especially if you want to fast roll with it. So in other words, given all these sacrifices that you have to make, I think it should inflict a little more damage than what it does, especially seeing that it weighs 22 units. The same could be said with some of these dragon weapons that require 50 strength. I mean, not only does it require 50 strength, but it's extremely heavy. So for the most part, you will be restricted to a medium roller. Or, I mean, you could just kind of take a chance like myself, rock 33 poise, and be a fast roller. But, I mean, I just really think with all the sacrifices you have to make, you should be able to inflict more damage. Now, let's just play devil's advocate with regard to the dragon weapons. Now, granted, the R2s do have areas of effect. But, even though they do have those area of effect, R2s, I mean, they still should hit a little harder, in my opinion, for those standard R1 attacks. Alright, so enough about that rant. Now, later on in this series, good old Arianto, he kind of uses two different builds. Right, so during the most part of the first part of the video, he uses strength builds, and then a little later on, you guys will notice that he would break out, I think, like a halberd, more a Kumo maybe, and definitely a claymore. So he kind of experiments. All right, so Eric is pretty versatile with regard to both dex and or quality weapons as well as strength weapons. And like I've said before, I really like those type of players that do not limit themselves to one or two weapons. Right, and the way I see it, I don't necessarily judge how well a person plays only by the number of wins they get, but I also judge about versatility, right? Because it cannot be denied that given the moveset and certain limitations that certain weapons have, if you can be successful with strength weapons, I would give you a little more kudos than I would with someone who uses, let's just say, a katana. Right, and actually I'm not using a katana as an example to beat up on it, but I'm just simply saying it's a little more fail-safe when you use a katana versus using strength weapons. So in other words, if you can be at least equally as successful with strength weapons as you could with a dex weapon, I would probably give the person who uses strength weapon a little more kudos, right? Because it takes a lot more time, a lot more patience, a lot more dedication, right? Especially based upon the slow movement and the vulnerability to attacks, based upon a miss swing. Alright, so enough about that long rant about Eric and his build. So let's go ahead and move on to good old Blue Bee. Now, in the beginning, it looks like he was rocking a Faith character, right? Because he casted Wrath of the Gods a couple times. And then a little later on, he just kind of went on to, I think it was just a quality build. And he definitely did a good job with that. Now, quality build, there's really not much to talk about quality builds, right? I mean, you get tons of benefits, and I think the only limitations that come is those limitations that come with the individual player, right? So if you kind of need practice, you just simply need practice, but it's not really that many cons with regard to a quality build. I mean, you get to use a wide variety of weapons, and you can basically fast roll with those type of weapons. Now, I don't know if I've mentioned before, but I always have problems. Case in point, I just lost to this guy. And actually, I'm not discrediting his own abilities. I'm just kind of using it as an example for what I'm about to say. I often lose to poise stackers and people who use the Darkwood Grain Ring all the time. right? Because, and actually, I can't really say I often lose. I'll just say whenever I'm faced against those type of players, instead of being a lot more aggressive, I find that I am a lot more defensive. Now, why would I have to be a little more defensive when I'm facing a Darkwood Grain user or a person who rocks a lot of poise? The main reason is because a person who rocks a lot of poise, they can be extremely aggressive. And in the event that you hit them while they're attacking you, their attacks will not be interrupted. So if you're rocking lower poise and let's just say you're faced against a guy who's rocking, let's just say 63 poise, they can just basically charge you without thinking about any other punishment other than receiving damage. Right, and I kind of talked about this one time in the past. There's several streamers who I know that kind of has a similar play style. And the funny thing about that, when you just kind of look at it, a lot of those guys also play Demon Souls, right? And I know it's personal preference. I mean, who really cares? I'm just kind of making an observation. A lot of those guys play Demon Souls, right? And when coming from Demon Souls, it is kind of interesting that they would choose to stack a crap load of poise, right? You would kind of think that coming from that type of game with no poise and being familiar with, with how to play with little to no poise, you would think that some of them could equally adjust to Dark Souls, right? But there's a good number of them who have always used a lot of poise, always. Now there's some who use a good number of different builds, right? May it be high poise, may it be low poise, but there are a few that I can think of off the top of my head that ever since I've known them, they have always rocked a crap load of poise, always, and their play style have always been aggressive. And when I look at it, I'm like, well, I mean, I kind of understand why that guy's aggressive. I mean, it's kind of like no punishment. No one's going to interrupt his attack, so he can just basically running two-hand R2 you and just suck around and BS and, throw up the hands with the GG. There's no punishment there. So, that's one thing with regard to poise stackers. You really have to be a little more defensive. You can't really go balls to the wall because I really think that you'll lose in most cases. Like, unless you're using a katana or kind of like a fail-safe weapon, you'll be on the short end of the stick because they can trade out licks with you with little to no punishment. And if you have less poise than them, more than likely they're going to beat you. Alright, so that's one of the good things about playing builds with high poise. I mean, you can really take trades to your benefit. Now, another reason why you would have to be a little more defensive with Darkwood Grain Ring, and as many times as I've played against Darkwood Grain Ring users, one thing that I've learned is if you try to chase them, you've basically lost. Because seeing, how fast they can evade attacks, seeing how quickly they can bait you in, seeing that they can pretty much roll BS anything that you do, if you try to chase them while they're just flipping all around the screen, for the most part you're going to lose because they have more control, right? Because seeing that you're chasing after them, you are losing control. And seeing that they're basically baiting you into chasing them, they have more control. So one thing that I've learned about playing against Darkwood Grain Ring users, instead of feeding into what they want you to do, it's kind of best to just sit back, let them flip all over the screen, and then once they come in to try to engage, do what you can do. And for the most part, you'll have to use the best weapon to try to take advantage of all those flips, right? May it be let's just say, a Quelaag Fury Sword. Right, maybe even in some cases you might want to use, maybe a Falcon, right? Because although they will be able to flip out of most weapons, right? Maybe Murakumo. As a matter of fact, shout out to Apple's Gone BlueBeee898. He has a video wherein he's just ninja flipping out of this guy Murakumo attacks, and I'm just sitting there watching that video like, you know what? That is absolutely ridiculous, seeing that those guys are taking no damage. But I mean, that was just kind of like a joking video, but I just thought it was a good example. But hey, I'm talking way too much about all these subjects, and this is the last clip of the video. So let me just go ahead and wrap it up by offering my thanks and show of appreciation once again to good old Eric Arianto and BlueBeee898. I really appreciate this opportunity. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and hey, until next time, Martyrs Brigade is